Amendment. But when a nation is at war, it is not protected.
The legacy of Holmes and Schenck even survives today. His test that he creates in Schenck, although in slightly different form, is still alive and well in free speech cases. And Holmes creates a test which he calls the clear and present danger test, that speech which has a clear meaning, speech that one can see that articulately would affect the government's ability to continue to exist, and its danger was present, meaning immediate and specific, that speech was not allowed, that it could be regulated under the Constitution, that free speech under the First Amendment didn't protect that. Holmes gave a famous analogy, always widely quoted by students, that one cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. That the word fire in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it, but the specificity of the comment, the immediacy of the reaction to it, would make it to create a clear and present danger.
On the battlefront, World War I raged on. It was devastating to many parts of Europe and took terrible tolls of human life. In the Battle of the Somme, for example, British forces suffered about 60,000 casualties in a single day. The 4-month battle left a total of more than 1 million men dead. New weapons like Germany's submarines and aircraft brought destruction without warning from beneath the seas and out of the skies. Germany also had some 6,000 artillery pieces, including one called Big Bertha. This huge gun could send a 2,100-pound projectile to a target 9 miles away. Germany also used poison gas on their enemies. Without a gas mask, a soldier could suffocate to death in a matter of minutes.
I would think if you look at the international community and the laws that the international community lives by, not all is fair in love and war. That it is clear that there's certain conduct that has been agreed upon by nations that is not allowable in warfare, and so no, I would not think that any conduct by a nation should be allowable simply because it's wartime.
Despite Germany's terrible weapons and troop strength, they were defeated by the Allied powers. The war ended in November of 1918. Germany surrendered in the face of a demoralized and broken army and rioting and starvation at home. World War I was considered to be the war to end all wars. The destruction and human suffering was staggering. The Central Powers, mainly Bulgaria, followed by Germany and Austria-Hungary, suffered the greatest human losses. The Allied powers, principally Russia, France, and England, lost fewer lives, but overall, 8.5 million people died, and 21 million more were wounded. The war left Europe's industries and agriculture in ruins. France was hit the hardest. 750,000 homes were destroyed, and 23,000 factories were reduced to rubble. British economist John Maynard Keynes made this observation.
For mile after mile, nothing was left. No building was habitable, and no field fit for the plow. One devastated area was exactly like another. A heap of rubble, morass of shell holes, and tangles of wires.
Wilson's 14 Points of 1918. President Woodrow Wilson presented his 14-point peace plan to Congress just 2 months after the German surrender.
Woodrow Wilson's 14 Points is the high point in idealism in American foreign policy. Woodrow Wilson intended to end history, in a sense, to move a quantum leap towards a rule-governed, law-governed international relations in which force would be supplanted by right. Now, this is a wonderful idea, but it's very hard to actually realize any utopian scheme. And the problem with Woodrow Wilson is that he was utopian.
It outlined his plan for building peace in the post-war world. 9 of the 14 points deal with self-determination, the right of all nations to govern themselves, free from outside interference. Other points deal with the causes of modern warfare, like secret diplomacy, the arms race, violation of freedom of the seas, and trade barriers. The final point was a key one, the establishment of a League of Nations.
The League of Nations idea of Wilson never really entices the American government, and they never participate to the level that Wilson desired, mainly because the Americans felt it would drag them into a war, and Europe really takes the concept further without the Americans participating.
The League of Nations was dear to Wilson's heart. It would require that each member nation respect and preserve the independence and territorial integrity of all other member nations.
Now, the 14 points are actually derived from a German idealist writer named Immanuel Kant. He wrote an essay called Perpetual Peace, in which he sketched out every single article, or the idea behind every single article in the 14 points. The idea is that each nation should be self-governing and self-determining, that colonies should not be bought and sold between colonial powers, that war should be abolished and arbitration should replace the kind of ultimate resource for resolving international disputes, and that a League of Nations should be created. Kant thought that up at the end of the 18th century. Woodrow Wilson, because he started his career as a professor of politics at Princeton, decided that this was an excellent idea, that what we really need was a greater legal connection between nations, which would essentially erode the authority and sovereignty of the nation state. The problem with the 14 points is not that they perhaps aren't an attractive idea, it's that their attraction is primarily theoretical rather than practical. Most of the nations of Western Europe refused to take seriously the idea of the 14 points.
The American people warmly received the 14 points, but it had a difficult time in Congress. The Allied powers' reaction, likewise, was lukewarm.
As Clemenceau, the Premier of France, said, "God gave us the 10 Commandments and we broke them. Wilson has given us his 14 points and we shall see."
The Treaty of Versailles, 1919. Just weeks after the unveiling of Wilson's 14-point peace plan, the Treaty of Versailles talks began, here at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris. The conference was attended by the Big Four, representing the Allied powers: Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States; David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of England; Georges Clemenceau, the French Premier; and Vittorio Orlando, Prime Minister of Italy. The European leaders wanted Germany to bear the financial brunt of the war and pay reparations, that is, payments to the Allied powers. They also wanted secret spoils of war treaties honored. These demands violated principles in Wilson's 14 points. Wilson tried to bring a moderating influence to the meetings, but the European powers had their way.
The Treaty of Versailles imposes enormous crippling indemnities on Germany, which is understandable because the French had suffered a tremendous loss of manpower and economic goods during the First World War, and also they were still smarting from the resounding defeat they took in the Franco-Prussian War. So they wanted back their territory, but they also wanted large indemnities.
The Treaty of Versailles was finally signed June 28, 1919. America's Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, had this reaction to the treaty.
The terms of peace appear immeasurably harsh and humiliating.
The treaty called for these measures. Germany was disarmed, forced to admit full responsibility for the war, and made to pay $6.6 billion in reparations.